It's a wild world out there, but some worlds are even wilder. Hi, my name is Tyler Hapney, and you're listening to Dungeons and Dystopias. Thank you for listening. Hello, and welcome back to Dungeons and Dystopias. My name is Tyler Hapney. I am your host and game master. I have GM'd over 200 games of Cyberpunk Red and Dungeons and Dragons combined. So this podcast is a little way for me to express some of my various thoughts on the different systems, rules, settings, various things that happen to go into each of those systems. And I am today going to be talking about Dungeons and Dragons. In particular, we're going to be taking a little walk on the spooky side, and we're going to be investigating one of D&D's most popular settings. That is not the Forgotten Realms. It's not Planescape. This is Ravenloft. What is Ravenloft? For those who are uninitiated, it is D&D's horror setting. So spooky things are happening, very scary, sort of that kind of feel. It's supposed to fit all sorts of different types of horror, but primarily the one that gets the most attention is the section of the Ravenloft setting that is known as Barovia, which is more gothic horror, vampires, stuff like that. We will get to that. We will get to quite a lot of Curse of Strahd, I'm assuming, throughout the rest of this podcast. But for this one in particular, we want to look at, generally kind of all of Ravenloft. Well, or some of it, most of it. There's a lot. But without further ado, let's kind of get into it. So what is Ravenloft, technically? So getting out of game, it is a system where you can play various different types of horror with your game, your crew, and it'll work out because of the way Ravenloft works. In universe, Ravenloft is, or otherwise known as the Domains of Dread, is essentially a pocket dimension of some kind, or multiple pocket dimensions that exist on the edge of the Shadowfell, which is, like our world, but everything's dark and creepy and shadowy, and everything hates each other. It's a pretty rough place, but at the very edge of the Shadowfell, there's these things called the Domains of Dread, which are these little pocket dimensions that were essentially created to punish one particular person of some kind. It can be literally any sorts of people, but generally these Domains of Dread are built around their fears, maybe, insecurities, stuff like that. But that sort of begins to form an environment around the person in question, and that allows the Domains of Dread to be all sorts of things. There's one Domain of Dread that is just a giant circus. Is inhabited by talking toys that will try to kill you. That's fun, right? Everyone kind of loves that. There's another Domain of Dread that is very snowy, but it's all sort of based off of Frankenstein. So there's a lot of like technological kind of body horror involved as well. It's got a sort of, I don't want to call it steampunk, but it does have a very sort of technological bent to the setting that you don't usually get anywhere else in like the Forgotten Realms or really anywhere else. But yeah, basically the Domains of Dread are these prisons that are made by these mysterious shadowy figures who watch over the domains and make sure everything's going well. It is possible to cross between domains. In fact, sometimes the people who are supposedly trapped in these prison domains have managed to escape into other domains. And domains in the past have gone to war with each other and have merged together or have, taken each other over. And the Domains of Dread they are kind of this sort of shifting place where you can go from one domain to the next, and that will sort of change things as it has in D&D lore in the past. For instance, Barovia wasn't always what it is now. If you look at the 5e map of Barovia, it's quite large. That's not how it used to be at all. In fact, if I remember, Barovia was mostly just the village of Barovia and then Castle Ravenloft. And then I don't know how much else was there, but over time, Barovia has grown, as I understand it, because specifically Barovia has managed to absorb a couple of other domains of dread into its sort of being. So that's where you get the sort of snowy mountain area in the bottom of Ravenloft. You get a whole bunch of different sort of things that come from other domains of dread. So let's kind of get into a couple of these domains of dread. I've already sort of mentioned a few. Barovia, Frankenstein one, we'll call it that before we get into its actual name. All these are very interesting. They're all different settings, but let's actually get into some of these really interesting ones. The first one we're going to be talking about is, of course, Barovia. Barovia is the imprisonment area of one Strahd von Zarovich, the most insanely popular vampire in all of Dungeons and Dragons. Strahd is a well-known villain, just in general, and he's he rolls over this land like he's Count Dracula. He's basically Count Dracula from the beginning of the actual Dracula movie. He's, it's kind of got this whole sort of Transylvanian, Romanian aesthetic going on. And then he's this big guy living in this big imposing tower over a village that is terrified of him. Typical vampire stuff. And he has insane amounts of control over Barovia. A lot of people generally report to Strahd. He has a lot of spies everywhere. But the problem with that is, this is a prison, and Strahd is, of course, the prisoner here. He is bound to essentially live this endless cycle of trying to find his one love and then having them basically taken away from him over and over and over again. This cycle repeats to basically torment Strahd, who has all this power but can't get the woman he wants, and he's always in this infinite pursuit of something that will likely never ever come to him. And the Curse of Strahd campaign is essentially a group participating in one of these loops where Strahd is just unable to actually get what he wants. But he is a mighty strong enemy, I'll tell you that. Don't mess with Strahd, especially early on. He will kill you. Or he'll play with you for a bit, and then, he'll let you think you got hope, stuff like that. He's a pretty rough guy. But that is Barovia. Easily one of the more fleshed out, I'd say, D&D settings, just because it's one large zone, and there's just so much going on in Barovia that it's a pretty cool place. Pretty cool. I'd give Barovia a solid 9 out of 10. Next one I want to talk about is, I mentioned the carnival. That one's pretty basic. It is just a giant carnival with talking puppets and toys and all of that stuff. But here's interesting. You want to know who else was a inhabitant of the Domains of Dread? Vecna. Vecna, the infinitely popular crazy guy I talked about a few episodes ago. You've probably heard the name if you've watched Stranger Things, but you don't know much, might not know much about the actual guy. But Vecna is a wizard from the Dungeons and Dragons settings. He's in fact one of the most popular wizards. I don't want to say popular, but one of the more well-known, famous, infamous even. He has been responsible for a lot of the larger scale changes and shifts in D&D cosmology. One of the biggest ones is, for instance, he turned himself into a god not too long ago, and we're still kind of dealing with the fallout of Vecna having that sort of divine power and being able to kind of do things as he pleases, I guess, amongst the gods. That being said, Cavidius is the domain of Vecna, who was briefly imprisoned in the Domains of Dread. And Cavidius, just on its own, is a very, very interesting location. So the main draw of Cavidius is the Citadel Cavidius, which is essentially a giant city built inside of a hollowed out skull in the middle of this huge ash domain that you can't really go out and like breathe in or anything. And this city inhabits undead, all sorts of different like ghosts, all sorts of different creatures. And I think that's generally a pretty cool place. It's also, I mean, pretty terrible for any mortals to be caught running around there. But at the same time, I think it is pretty darn neat to go to Cavidius and start hanging around there. So next up, we are going to be talking a little bit about the that Frankenstein domain I mentioned earlier, and that one, my friends, is Lamortia. So Lamortia is a snowy sort of place where this one's kind of interesting. There's technically two prisoners we can talk about here. One of them being Victor, and the other one being Victra. Victra being essentially just a female version of Victor, but is the new inhabitant of this domain as of 5e. So obviously there's already some sort of differences, I guess you could say, in a lot of the sort of presentation between how the past has gone with Ravenloft and how the things in the past, or things are going in the future. So Lamortia is a lot about body horror and technological horror and science and stuff like that. And the main core of this one is the Dark Lord. If we're gonna let's go for the 5e version. The Dark Lord here is Victor Mordenheim, who is basically Frankenstein, and they have created a monster. And essentially their punishment is to forever be hunting this monster who constantly is breaking out and running off and doing all sorts of stuff. And they constantly have to kind of chase after it. There's a couple of different options. In the earlier past, the monster was known as Adam. Now it's something completely different. And the monster is a woman. So it's definitely sort of gone through some changes, but Lamortia as it stands is mostly the same place, a sort of German-inspired, Frankenstein playground, I guess would be the best way to put it. But I've personally always wanted to run something through Lamortia. Just seems like a very interesting kind of spot to kind of do all that stuff in. And then I think I'm going to wrap it up by talking about the next one, Falkovnia. This is more of a, I guess you're living under authoritarian rule. There's a zombie apocalypse. There's a lot going on in Falkovnia, but the most important part of Falkovnia is that it is ruled with an iron fist by the guy in charge, and he does not give two hoots what anyone thinks about him. I believe Falkovnia is also the one that is actively at war, and for that reason, there's a lot of undead roaming the area, and that might just be part of the Domain of Dread in general. It's been a bit since I've actually done a bunch of reading on Falkovnia, but it is, dark forests, undead. There's, a military that is actively oppressing you. Vlad Drakov is the guy in charge, and trust me, you do not want to be on his bad side. Just keep that in mind. But, all these different domains of dread kind of add together to create a very interesting setting where you can basically pick any type of horror and there is something there for you. In fact, they even make, in the 5e of Van Richten's Guide to Ravenloft, they come up with advice for creating your own domains of dread if you want to follow, certain genres of horror or something. Like, I don't believe any of the domains of dread necessarily, or I'm sure there is one or two, but that go after a slasher style horror, there's not exactly a ton of those where maybe there's like one person that's sort of hunting everything down, which would be cool. It'd be a cool thing, but for the most part, it is a lot of gothic stuff. There's disease, pestilence, plagues. There's one where it's a constant cycle of like waves of rats that are plagued, and they send this contagious disease and infection all over. It's like a cycle. They're all cycles. And they're all made to eternally torment one specific person. So that is a very eclectic view on the domains of dread. I think now we're going to get into our creature or monster of the week. And I would today like to discuss, well, one of those types of creatures I think could serve as a really good slasher villain for a certain type of campaign. And that, my friends, is the Bagman. What is the Bagman? Well, the Bagman is a new addition to Dungeons & Dragons. It's only in 5e. It came out in the Van Richten's Guide to Ravenloft I mentioned earlier. And this thing is insane. AC of 15 and HP of 84, AT 10 plus 40. So, pretty decent. Initiative of 1. Can speak giant because it is huge. This thing is like 10 feet tall. And the basic gist of the Bagman is every time, you leave your bag of holding unattended, there's a chance that there's something crawling around through the ether in the wherever the bag of holding goes to, and maybe it just so happens to find your bag. And so while everyone's asleep, it crawls out of your bag of holding, this like 10-foot tall monster with like hair covering its face. It's got long claws. It's emaciated. It's, you can see its spine. Like, it's just this gross, disgusting thing. I imagine it moves with like, everything cracks when it moves. I imagine that's probably a situation you got to deal with. And it is basically what it does is it'll crawl out of your bag when everyone's asleep, approach whoever it wants, and then it will grab them and drag them into the bag, and then they'll never be seen again. That's terrifying. Like, just imagine, you're in Ravenloft or Barovia or wherever, and you and your crew are sat down for a nice, camp. You've got one guy kind of watching the, the camp to make sure nothing happens. And that one guy gets to witness insane horrors beyond comprehension as a giant 10-foot tall monster crawls out of the bag of holding, grabs one of his allies, and, tries to drag him into basically what is essentially just a satchel on the ground. That's messed up. That's traumatizing. For a D&D adventurer, the Bagman is, that's a threat. I mean, most D&D parties have a bag of holding at this point. In our day and age, I don't see, there are a ton of many D&D groups out there that don't have, a bag of holding. So really, honestly, this is a creature that can strike at just any time, or you can make it more of a story where, maybe your characters are trying to summon the Bagman or trying to figure out how to like defeat him, for some purpose. And maybe, maybe they have to like put something outside the bag at night to try to lure the Bagman, out into the open so they can attack him. I don't know. I think it would be interesting. The Bagman though, let's talk a bit about some of its mechanical abilities. You can't read the Bagman's thoughts. If you try, you must succeed on a DC 8 intelligence save or be stunned for a minute, which is insane. That could be pretty rough. You repeat the saving throw at the end of each of your turns, so maybe not a full minute, but still could be rough. The Bagman can move through a space as narrow as 1 inch wide without squeezing. Okay, that's terrible. That's terrifying. Like, oh my god. Grappler. The Bagman has advantage on attack rolls against any creature grappled by it. So if it grabs you, it'll hit you even better. It has advantage on wisdom checks or perception checks that rely on smell, so it can smell really well. And last but not least, it regenerates 10 HP at the start of each of its turns, unless it takes acid or fire damage. So already but got to use acid or fire to fight this thing. You can't read its mind. It can fit through gaps as small as 1 inch. Yeah, this thing is crazy. Its bites and its claws each deal 1d6 and 2d6 plus 4 respectively. So this thing's dealing some decent damage. It makes 3 attacks too. So 1 with its bite and 2 with its claws, which means that's combined total of, that's 5d6 plus 12 if it hits all of its attacks. Yow! That's not good. So yeah, next time you're taking a small little break as an adventurer, do keep the Bagman in mind, and maybe, just maybe, put that bag of holding upside down next time you go to take rest. Anyways, that'll be it for us this week. Thank you so much for listening. We are pretty deep into this podcast, and I always appreciate being able to come in and record another episode. So once again, would just like to thank you for listening. This has been Dungeons and Dystopias. Please come back next week. My name has been Tyler Hapney. Thank you so much for listening.